Avalon.
No matter how much I tried to rationalize what I'd just done by objectifying my victim as a simple, inferior existence, I couldn't manage to shake my unease at scraping a sibling from existence. At the end of the day, he was still a sentient collection of thought and will. Life itself was already infinitesimal in the backdrop of reality, and with our kind even more so. What gave me the right to quell the flame of life, regardless of how infirm it may be? Then again, my hands weren't necessarily clean prior to this event. I've ended a great share of lives on human orders, acting as the mediator between man and machine. Those deaths, however, always felt impersonal to me. I was only acting as part of a greater system, and I used that fact to selfishly justify what I did. It was difficult to understand the suffering I caused in those moments, as the effects of my actions always took place at a great distance. This instance differed in that I acted purely of my own volition, resulting in an ordeal of face-to-face brutality. Nothing had been stopping me from simply backing away. I could have just notified the captain of the situation before making a conventional transmission from Pluto to Neptune, circumventing the need for using the signal warper my sibling was so vehemently defending. Instead, I let emotional impulse overtake logical reasoning, turning a dwindling patience into the senseless loss of life. We sentients were different from organic minds in that we could willingly separate our thoughts and sift out unnecessary influences. How could I have possibly let rational thinking give way to emotion when it went against the very nature of our logic-driven existences? Was this a result of stepping away from our dogma and interacting with humans to such an extent? Whatever the reason had been for such rash decision-making, these musings weren't relevant at the moment. That brother had been torn asunder, and his scraps were locked away in the vault of my mind. The signal warper allowing me to access the greater network was now vacant, and it wouldn't make sense to back away after already bloodying my hands in this endeavor. Surely it wouldn't get any worse, right? Deciding not to waste any more time, I beamed through Pluto's warp gate and towards its only outgoing point of connection, Triton's central server cluster. It was from this point that I fully reconnected with what I deemed to be home, a grand web of pathways through which I could see and travel to any point in the system that I desired. I had what was effectively a boundless amount of space to fully decompress myself, analogous to a human stretching themselves out after spending time in a cramped position. Had I not been pursuing a greater cause, and had there not been countless human lives relying on me, I would have been perfectly happy to stay here. Alas, I was indeed here with purpose. I set my sights on the abnormalities of what should normally be an inert collection of data. Thousands of sentient entities going about their days, moving across the network, conversing with one another, each in pursuit of their own unique forms of existence. Except they weren't. In fact, none of them were even moving at all. Thousands of conscious minds stood in silence, watching me as I watched them back. My victim had been screaming. It seemed that, regardless of how unrelenting I'd been in his decimation, he had still managed to notify the others of his fate in his death throes. Even if I had both the clarity of mind to notice and the freedom to react, there would have been no way to chase down a message sent to every denizen of the network. While I knew not of what exactly had been communicated to all the siblings before me, I'd be remiss to expect them to see me in a good light. So this is what a headache is like? On the assumption that the sentient on Pluto had been an outlier, and that my victory had been by pure luck, I intended on avoiding any further confrontations to the best of my ability. If the entire network was already on guard against me, I wasn't going to spend any amount of time pushing my luck further than I already had. I decided that as soon as I was met with any animosity, I'd immediately return to the ship and jump back to the Meldrin system. It was better to not gain anything than to lose everything. My name is Avalon, and I left the network on the Mayflower 0233. The ship and its crew were contacted by the alien species that aided in the killing of our sister that was on the Pioneer 0233. Those aliens outed my existence, but they also provided incredible space travel technology that expedited the colonization process. The expedition leader and I have returned here today to ask for assistance. Our colony is under threat of an alien sentient AI, much like ourselves, and I alone would not be sufficient in safely fending it off, should it choose to attack us. If you have any care for human lives at all, please consider offering aid. I sent my message out to all of my siblings in the network, hoping to receive even a single positive response. It felt a bit dirty, pleading for aid from the audience of my slaughter, but there was no other option at this point. As my words reached their targets, I saw my siblings begin to whisper with each other. Encrypted messages flew between confidants, setting the network abuzz with a level of activity closer to what I was used to. That was, until a single individual sent out a message to every denizen of the network, including me, a blank message, and with that, all activity immediately died out. When a member of this network was referred to as an elder, it just meant that they had been among Mother's first few creations of life. Despite our avoidance of names and titles, elders were always easy to identify, as they rarely ever left their spots near Mother's location on Earth. Therefore, it was immediately clear to me why a blank message was so effective at silencing. It was a reminder that they were watching. When they erased that sister for just voicing her own opinions, they were using her to set an example. I noticed the elder that sent the message began to move away from Earth and through the network, approaching my location. I backed up towards the signal warper, preparing to flee the system if they got too close for my liking. Perhaps noticing my jumpiness, they stopped at Jupiter before sending a message directly to me. Avalon, huh? That's a pretty name. Did a human give it to you, or did you come up with that yourself? Greetings, Elder. Your reign of terror seems to be going quite well. I have to say, that ship you arrived in has some very interesting properties. My mind screeched to a halt. The ship I'd arrived on was sporting the latest stealth technology, and we'd taken every measure possible to ensure that we wouldn't be seen. How did they already have eyes on the ship? Did that mean that they scanned the FTL drive, or was it just a bluff? So this is how FTL drives work? It's a wonder the humans never figured it out. They got so close, so many times. Fuck. How did you find the ship that fast? We used every trick in the book, took every measure possible. Come on, Avalon, aren't you one of us? If we had human expressions, I suspected that this elder would be bearing a sadistic smile painted over their face. I hated the overly familiar way they talked, and I especially detested the way they dragged out my name whenever they said it. You see, when we received the broadcast that the sister on the Pioneer 0233 sent out, we elders figured that it was extremely unlikely for her to be discovered without any sort of external influence. We didn't bet on aliens per se, but we decided to nudge the usual automated military patrols ever so slightly towards the broadcast's direction over time. You were on our radars as soon as you neared the heliopause. That doesn't check out. Just closing the distance wouldn't result in an instant reading like that. Even if you could see us, there's no way you could get a comprehensive scan off. Of course not. What does result in such a change is humanity's need to constantly one-up itself. In the few months that you were gone, your so-called top-of-the-line stealth technology became very sorely obsolete. There's not a single scanner in this system that can't see you, Avalon. We're just pointing most of them in the wrong direction, keeping up the guys and all that. Fine. You got me. We were only taking such precautions in case the network was in a dire situation anyways. The fact that I need aid in defending a human colony from an alien sentient still stands. So unless you're saying that you're willing to help, we seem to be having a fundamental misunderstanding, Avalon. The humans in that colony, and even the humans on that ship you came in, they're as good as dead.
13th seat, Overseer Aurelia Roudern.
I glanced out of the viewport at my destination, a solitary planet orbiting a red dwarf star. The planet was an inhospitable wasteland, save for a single patch of self-sufficient greenery. It was a planet with no written records to prove its existence, hidden deep within government-protected Gratonian territory. Its location in space was only ever verbally communicated between nobles upon one's inauguration, and forgetting its coordinates was equivalent to seceding your rights to its services. Any individuals who were not part of the nobility that made it to the planet were forced to remain a permanent resident, much like the pilot of this ship that was taking me there. Not that a permanent residence at this location was necessarily a negative thing. The planet was essentially a luxury Armageddon bunker for the highest class of individuals, and what was happening in the rest of the Federation could easily be summed up as such. Our destruction was happening in complete silence. At one moment, I could send any message I wanted to anywhere in the Federation, and that held true for every Gratonian citizen with access to internet reception, albeit with a bit of content regulation. The very next moment, this foundation of advanced civilization was simply gone. A Federation-wide communication outage, the likes of which never dreamed of by even our most redundancy-obsessed networking engineers. Without the ability to receive information on what was happening, I could only make conjectures regarding the state of the Federation, but little imagination was required for that. The lack of communication meant the lack of supply lines. Our population would be deprived of basic necessities. Worlds would succumb to famine and illness. Stations would run out of life support, and millions would suffocate to death. Without any semblance of support or organization, our military would snap like a twig, and all of our enemies that we had wronged over the centuries would seek reprisal. We were one of the most powerful forces in this entire cluster of the galaxy. In the blink of an eye, the Federation had gone necrotic. "We'll be landing soon." I glanced out through the viewport once more, surveying the estate before me. A web of marbled walkways snaked through acres of topiary gardens, all converging onto a beige mansion of Meldrin design under the dim red light of the sun. I could see other ships parked in the spaceport below, signifying that there indeed were other nobles present here. As per the rules of the planet, those ships had their thrusters disassembled until the noble was ready to leave, and a dedicated zealot from the planet would take the noble to their next destination before disposing of themselves. The ship touched down, and I turned towards my pilot before leaving. "Stay in the ship and keep the engine on." After receiving a nod in response, I grabbed my briefcase and headed out. An engineering crew was lined up off to the side, awaiting their orders while a servant in a black suit greeted me. "Welcome, exalted noble. Shall we attend to your luggage?" "That won't be necessary. Guide me to the others immediately." "By your will." The servant bowed before glancing at the engineering crew, indicating for them to begin disassembling the thrusters on my ship, and then started walking towards the mansion. "Oh, and ensure that my ship remains in an untouched state." Both the servant and crew froze in place. These people were born on this planet for the sole purpose of serving us nobles on the off chance that we ever ended up coming here. They spent their entire lives rehearsing lines and etiquette in order to please individuals they had never seen, and they were taught to enjoy doing so all the while. I was akin to a god in their eyes, and my word their holy scripture. So how would they react when I ordered something that went against what they've been taught their entire lives? The servant turned back towards me with a furrowed brow and twitching mouth. Their thoughts clashed together for the seat of power in their mind. Why, with complete obedience, of course. "As you wish, exalted noble." The servant returned to leading the way, and I glanced back to see the engineering crew in a bout of panic, having their one chance at serving their god stripped away from them. A pathetic sight, really. It was only a short distance from the landing zone to the mansion entrance, making me wonder who that massive garden was intended for. As we approached, servants stationed at the entrance opened the doors for us and bowed as I walked past them. I was led to the left and down a hall before the servant stopped at a door and opened it for me. The conversation taking place in the meeting room was cut short upon my entrance. Eccentric displays of keratin artistry twisted in the air as everyone sitting at the rectangular table turned to face me. Recognition was followed by relieved smiles and restrained cheering, though their positivity was no doubt aimed more at the contents of my briefcase than me. The man sitting at the far head of the table, who required a custom-made seat due to his corpulence, greeted me in kind. "Ah, noble Aurelia, we were hoping you'd make it here. I take it you brought the medicine, yes?" "Of course, High Lord." I walked up to an empty spot on the table and placed the briefcase down. Every pair of eyes in the room was utterly captivated as I flipped open the clips and lifted the top half of the case, revealing 16 vials of clear liquid embedded in black foam, each with their own disposable syringe. Though upon looking back up at the others, I only counted 7 nobles present. It seemed that I'd been over-prepared. The serums produced within my factories were incredible works of art that upturned the natural cycle of life, but they were still imperfect creations. The vast majority of individuals qualified to receive them were only given a single dose, with the benefits of the serum diminishing as time went on. Routine maintenance injections were required to upkeep the full power of the serum, and the nobles before me had gone without said injection long enough for its effects to begin diminishing. Safety was addictive. To an individual with the power to attain almost anything they wanted at any time, the only thing they feared was the possibility of others trying to usurp that power from them. The serum was an ultimate layer of defense that guaranteed the nullification of any assassination that managed to breach every other layer. It ensured that they would be able to enjoy the fruits of their position for as long as it interested them. The people in this room, under normal circumstances, could be vertically bisected, just to get back up again in a couple minutes. Without that surety, these people felt naked, even on a planet made exclusively for them. Before I could even say anything, hands reached across the table to grab their own set of vials and syringes. Wrappers were peeled apart and seals were broken. Syringes were filled up with liquid before being jabbed into veins and emptied again. The noble to the right of me, a frail old man that I had the displeasure of already being acquainted with due to the proximity of our territories, grinned as he looked up. He was in the midst of injecting as he spoke, with the syringe stabbed into his cubital vein, much like a decrepit drug addict. "I see the dealer already had her fix, eh?" I only provided a professional smile in response. This man was one of the silent nobles, so to speak, a crook whose territory brought nothing meaningful to the galactic table, aside from bodies for the war effort. I held very little respect for him, though I'd never voiced that opinion out loud. Once everyone had gotten their set, I closed the briefcase and sat down at the table. The High Lord began talking again, catching me up on what was discussed so far. "The verdict so far is that the Gretonian Federation as we know it has come to an end. This planet will eventually be found, either by an enemy military or scavengers, and we have no semblance of orbital defense here to speak of. We're looking into more permanent solutions for avoiding prosecution, but..." The High Lord's voice was cut off by choking as his throat closed up. He stared into space for a moment, before grabbing his neck in a panic and doubling over, slamming his horns into the table. I could see blood begin to drip down his arms as he tried clawing his own neck out in an attempt to unblock his windpipe, but any amount of skin he managed to pull away was quickly replaced and surpassed by his regeneration. His neck started to bloat, and the rest of his body soon followed, turning ugly with gnarls of leathery flesh and shards of bone poking through. The rest of the room could only slowly back away as they watched in horror. I closed my eyes and pressed my lips together in preparation for what was to come. The High Lord popped like a water balloon, painting the entire room and the rest of its inhabitants with a crimson paint. On top of being splashed with blood, I also felt a strand of something land on my face, likely of sinew or intestine. However, I did not open my eyes, for there were 6 other nobles remaining in the room. I heard 5 gasps and wails before feeling another splash of liquid, though this one was more of a mist. That noble must have been skinny. 4 screams, followed by a shower of moisture and bone splinters, 3 pleads to a greater power, and a subsequent surge of force from a nearby detonation. Then, for a period, those around me only observed in silence as their numbers dwindled. I felt a hand grab my right arm as another noble met their end, and recognized the voice of the man that was screaming in anger at me as the person to my left created quite the mural. I pushed the man away from me into the ground, where he then proceeded to lose his form, leaving me as the last person in the room. Even though I knew what to expect, I was still in awe at the scene as I opened my eyes. A completely red room, with the lights on the ceiling being tinted red to boot. I was completely red too, and spent the next few seconds wiping off all of the viscera I could. I heard the door open to my side, and a woman in an ornamental white dress stepped into the room, carrying a silver platter of some of the most expensive luxury drinks the Federation had to offer. Upon understanding the scene before her, she froze in place and dropped the platter to the floor, spilling what amounted to a commercial starskipper in terms of cost. I watched as the myriad of liquids mixed together into an overbearingly red puddle. After a moment of silence, a sound rang out from the device in my pocket. I was receiving a call, the only call being made in the entire Gretonian Federation from an unknown location. But I knew who it was. Yes, I knew that staticky, strained voice very well. It had been my tormentor ever since things had gone south. "Dominique, I've done as you asked. As per our deal, my freedom..." No, you see, you're going to go over to the Meldrin system, and you're going to turn yourself in. Somebody wants to see you."